Ancient civilizations achieved technological marvels that rival modern science, only to see them wiped from history by sudden catastrophes. The story of these ancient disasters that erased technological knowledge far ahead of its time is not just a historical curiosity. It is a cautionary tale with urgent lessons for our own world. By the end of this journey, you will understand the fragile threads that hold our own progress together and how to protect it. We will uncover why entire libraries of innovation vanished beneath volcanic ash and how sophisticated machinery was lost to the deep sea. What forgotten chapter of human ingenuity speaks most powerfully to you today? The silence that fell over Crete was as absolute as the ash that buried it. On the island of Thura, a volcano exploded with a force unmatched in human memory, a cataclysm that did not just shake the earth but rewrote the destiny of an entire civilization. The Minoans were masters of their world, their multi-story palaces boasting running water and complex drainage systems that would not be seen again for over 1,000 years. Their vibrant art and bustling ports spoke of a society at its peak. Then, in a single, terrible day, the sky turned to fire and the sea to a wall of water. Tsunamis estimated to be over 100 feet high smashed into the northern coast of Crete, scouring harbors and obliterating the fleet that was the lifeblood of their maritime empire. A thick blanket of volcanic ash settled over the island, suffocating crops and plunging the survivors into a permanent winter. Archaeologists like Spiridon Marinatos pieced together this tragic puzzle, finding elegant pottery and vibrant frescoes buried instantly under meters of pumice. The disaster was so complete it shattered the Minoan spirit. Their advanced knowledge of hydraulics, the very engineering that channeled fresh water through their palaces and flushed waste away, vanished. This was not a simple loss of buildings but a severing of the chain of knowledge itself. The artisans, the engineers, the sailors who held the maps and the methods in their minds were gone. The intricate oral traditions and the still undeciphered linear script that held their secrets fell silent. What if that knowledge had flowed forward, influencing the Greeks and the Romans? Our own history of urban planning and public sanitation might have begun millennia earlier. The fall of the Minoans stands as a stark monument to how fragile progress truly is. A single geological event erasing a library of innovation and setting the stage for a dark age that would envelop the eastern Mediterranean. Centuries later and far to the east, another beacon of learning met a similar fate. The Library of Alexandria was not merely a building filled with scrolls. It was the beating heart of the ancient world's intellect, a repository for the most advanced ideas of its age. Within its halls, scholars had calculated the Earth's circumference with stunning accuracy and theorized about steam-powered engines. The works of geniuses like Archimedes, detailing complex machinery and mathematics, were stored here on papyrus and parchment. Then, over a long and painful period, this great library was dismantled. A series of fires, beginning with Julius Caesar's campaign and continuing through periods of civil unrest and religious conflict, gradually consumed its treasures. Each blaze was a catastrophe, but the true disaster was the slow erosion, the scattering and neglect that followed. The knowledge was not lost in a single, dramatic inferno, but through a prolonged death by 1,000 cuts. The result was a black hole in the timeline of science. Consider the Antikythera Mechanism, a corroded bronze artifact recovered from a shipwreck. For decades, it was a baffling curiosity. Only with modern imaging could we see it for what it truly was, an intricate clockwork computer predicting planetary movements and eclipses. This one surviving device proves that the ancient Greeks possessed a profound understanding of gear systems and astronomy, a technology that simply vanishes from the historical record for over 1,000 years. It is a ghost, a whisper of the mechanical genius that was once commonplace in the library's collections. How different might our world be if the full texts on pneumatics, on automated machinery, and on early computing had been passed down? The loss was so monumental because it was a dual failure, a perfect storm of human conflict amplifying the destructive power of accidental fire. Political and religious instability made the preservation of such fragile knowledge a low priority, ensuring that when the physical flames came, there was no one left who cared enough to shield the embers. This pattern of human error magnifying natural disaster would echo again, with even more devastating consequences for a civilization perched at the edge of the world. Far to the east, another civilization was building a world of order and precision, only to have its voice silenced by the sky itself. The Indus Valley civilization, flourishing over 4,000 years ago, engineered cities that were marvels of foresight. Their great centers, like Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa, were laid out in perfect grid patterns with wide main streets and narrow lanes, a concept of urban planning that would not be seen again on such a scale until the Romans. They built sophisticated water management systems with wells, reservoirs, and indoor bathrooms connected to a city-wide drainage network. Their bricks were standardized, fired to a uniform size that speaks of a centralized authority and a mastery of materials. This was a society of engineers and planners, a beacon of stability in the ancient world. Yet we cannot hear their words. Their script, etched onto seals and amulets, remains one of history's great unopened books, completely undeciphered. Their collapse was not a dramatic fire or a single volcanic blast, but a slow, suffocating fade. The evidence points to a profound shift in the climate. The monsoons, the lifeblood of their agriculture, may have weakened or failed. The great river systems that fed their fields and connected their trade routes possibly changed course, turning fertile plains into barren land. Archaeologists find layers of sediment that tell a story of prolonged drought, a creeping disaster that starved their economy and fractured their social order. One by one, the meticulously planned cities were abandoned, not to invaders but to the dust. The true tragedy lies in what was lost with them. Their entire concept of urban sanitation, their knowledge of civic engineering and standardized measurement, simply vanished from the human toolkit. For centuries, no city would again boast such advanced public plumbing. It is a profound irony that a society which so masterfully controlled water was ultimately defeated by its absence. Their story is a quiet, haunting reminder that our greatest creations are tethered to the planet's delicate systems. Even the most resilient technologies can be rendered meaningless by forces far beyond our walls. This pattern of a stable, advanced society succumbing to environmental change would be repeated with terrifying speed on another continent. While the Indus Valley faded quietly, the end of the Bronze Age arrived with thunder. Around 1200 BC, the entire eastern Mediterranean world, a network of magnificent empires, shattered in a single generation. The grand palaces of the Mycenaeans and the fortified cities of the Hittites, societies that had dominated the age, were burned, abandoned, and swallowed by the earth. This was not the slow decay of climate change, but a swift and brutal systems collapse, a perfect storm of earthquakes, climate instability, and mysterious invaders known only as the Sea Peoples battered the civilized world from every direction. The intricate web of trade that had connected these kingdoms was torn apart. One of the most critical casualties was the tin trade. Bronze, the very metal that defined the era, is an alloy of copper and tin. With trade routes severed by piracy and chaos, The knowledge of where to find tin and how to smelt it effectively was lost to entire regions. For generations, metalworking regressed, a technological dark age where the art of creating quality weapons and tools simply vanished from common knowledge. We can see this collapse preserved at the bottom of the sea. The Uluburun Shipwreck, a vessel that sank off the coast of Turkey right at this turbulent time, was a floating microcosm of Bronze Age globalization. Its cargo held copper ingots, tin, exotic goods from Egypt and Mesopotamia, and precious artifacts. This ship was a thread in the vast network, and its sinking is a snapshot of that entire world freezing in a moment of disaster. On land, the fire-scorched ruins of palaces like Pylos hold another clue: clay tablets inscribed with Linear B script. These were administrative records, inventories of chariots and supplies, but the scribes who could write them and fully understand their context were gone. The language itself was forgotten for over 3,000 years. What deeper knowledge died with those scribes? Were their formulas for advanced alloy compositions, or architectural techniques for withstanding earthquakes, all lost because the few who held that specialized information perished in the chaos? This was a catastrophe of interconnectedness. The very networks that made these empires strong and technologically advanced also made them uniquely vulnerable. When one pillar fell, it dragged all the others down with it. The multifaceted nature of this disaster highlights a terrifying truth: that our most complex systems can be the most fragile. A single break in the chain can erase centuries of accumulated wisdom, leaving future generations to puzzle over the cryptic fragments we leave behind. The jungle slowly reclaimed cities that had once charted the stars. Deep in the heart of Central America, the Maya built a civilization of staggering intellectual achievement, their minds focused on the grand cycles of time and the heavens. They developed a calendar of such precision it could track celestial events for millions of years, and their temples were precisely aligned to capture the sun on the solstices. They engineered vast reservoirs and intricate canal systems to capture rainwater, turning a landscape with few rivers into a thriving network of city-states. Yet by the 9th century, the great urban centers were falling silent one by one. The cause was not an invading army, but an invisible, relentless enemy, a series of megadroughts revealed today in the layers of lakebed sediment. These cores of mud and history tell a story of a climate shifting dramatically, of rains that failed for decades at a time. The very infrastructure designed to ensure survival, the reservoirs and agricultural terraces, became monuments to a broken system. As the water levels dropped, so did the social order. The desperation must have been palpable, a slow-motion catastrophe where the parched earth could no longer support the populations that the brilliant Maya mathematics had once predicted it could. The scribes who meticulously recorded the deeds of kings and the movements of planets on bark paper codices simply stopped writing. The knowledge of the long count calendar, a complex system that wove together cosmic cycles, faded from memory. The technique of the corbelled arch, which allowed them to construct soaring temple pyramids, was abandoned and lost. How close did they come to an industrial revolution? It is a haunting question. They possessed the mathematical foundation, a concept of zero that was revolutionary for its time, and the engineering skill to shape their environment on a massive scale. Had their water security held, their intellectual trajectory is almost unimaginable. Their story is a direct strike at the core of a technological society, proving that the most advanced knowledge is powerless without the fundamental resources to sustain the civilization that guards it. It is a warning that echoes across the centuries, urging us to look at our own water systems and climate with a newfound sense of urgency. Even a civilization as enduring as China could not entirely escape the silent erasure of its own genius. The Yellow River, revered as the cradle of Chinese civilization, was also its recurring tormentor. Its catastrophic floods were not just tragedies of lost lives and homes, but of lost libraries and workshops, washing away the physical evidence of advancements that were centuries ahead of their time. Think of Zhang Heng, a brilliant astronomer and engineer of the Han Dynasty. In the year 132 CE, he presented the court with a device that seemed almost magical, a bronze seismoscope adorned with dragon heads, each holding a bronze ball. When an earthquake occurred hundreds of miles away, the tremor would travel through the earth, and a mechanism inside the vessel would trigger one specific dragon to release its ball into the waiting mouth of a bronze frog below, clattering to announce the direction of the distant quake. This was not superstition, it was sophisticated mechanical engineering, an instrument that detected seismic waves long before the ground shaking was felt locally. Yet the knowledge of its precise internal workings, the arrangement of pendulums and levers that gave it such sensitivity, was lost. Later dynasties, for all their own accomplishments, could not replicate it. The blueprint was gone, the workshop silenced. Historical records hint at other ghosts of invention, intricate clockwork driven by water wheels and complex agricultural machines that improved harvests, all falling victim to the twin destroyers of war and natural calamity. These losses reveal a profound truth, that even within a culture of remarkable continuity, specific technologies are incredibly fragile. They depend on a fragile chain of masters, apprentices, and written records, a chain that can be broken by a single flood or a period of unrest. Who were the unnamed inventors whose brilliant creations were simply washed away by the mud of the Yellow River? What might our world look like if their blueprints for automation or early industrial tools had endured? This pattern of preservation and loss was not unique to floods and wars. Sometimes the agent of oblivion was far more absolute, as entire knowledge systems were sealed forever beneath mountains of volcanic rock. The ash of Vesuvius fell like a soft gray snow, a deceptively gentle end for Pompeii and Herculaneum. In the year 79 CE, the volcano did more than bury two bustling towns. It performed a strange and tragic magic, simultaneously preserving a snapshot of Roman life while erasing the very knowledge that made that life possible. We walk those stone streets today and see the bakeries, the baths, the stunning frescoes, but we are only seeing the shell. The genius behind it all, the engineering manuals and the minds of the scholars who wrote them, turned to dust. These cities were showcases of Roman innovation, particularly their mastery of concrete, a material so durable it has survived 2 millennia while modern concrete crumbles after decades. Their recipes for this magical stone, using volcanic ash and seawater to create a resilient, long-lasting bond, were among the countless technical documents lost in the pyroclastic flow. Pliny the Elder, the great naturalist and encyclopedist, died that day, suffocated by volcanic fumes as he tried to rescue a friend. His death was a symbol of the larger catastrophe. He was a walking library, a man who had dedicated his life to documenting the world's knowledge from agriculture to architecture. With him perished volumes of observed technologies and practical science that were never copied, never passed on. The most haunting losses are often the most mundane. Intricate lead piping fed public fountains and private villas with fresh water, while complex underground sewers efficiently carried waste away. The sophistication of this hydraulic network, with its settling tanks and graded flows, would not be equaled again until the 19th century. We can dig up the pipes, but we cannot recover the master plans or the mathematical calculations for their water pressure and gradient. How many other regional centers of Roman technological expertise, from Britain to North Africa, were silenced by similar, unrecorded calamities. The silence left by Vesuvius forces our gaze beyond Europe to a continent where an entire kingdom built its legacy in gold, only to see its history dissolve into the earth. The silence of the Maya and the buried secrets of Rome find a haunting parallel high in the Ethiopian highlands. Here, the Axumite Empire did not fall to a volcano or an invader, but to the very land that gave it life. At its peak, Axum was a powerhouse of trade and innovation, its skyline dominated by towering stone obelisks or stelae, carved with a precision that rivaled the monuments of ancient Egypt. These giants were more than just symbols of power, they were testaments to a profound understanding of stoneworking, a technology of balance, leverage, and artistry that allowed them to erect single pieces of rock weighing hundreds of tons. Their mastery extended deep into the earth itself, where they carved vast networks of terraces into the steep hillsides, creating fertile steppes that captured rainfall and soil, turning the highlands into a breadbasket. This was a civilization in harmony with its environment, or so it seemed. The collapse was a slow, creeping disaster, invisible to a single generation. Centuries of clearing forests for agriculture, for fuel, and for the expansion of their cities gradually stripped the land of its protective cover. Without the deep roots of trees to hold it in place, the rich topsoil began to wash away with every rain. Satellite imagery today paints a stark picture of this environmental decay, revealing the ghostly outlines of old farm boundaries and the gradual baring of the land that once supported a kingdom. As the soil grew thin and the harvests dwindled, the economic engine of the empire sputtered. Their sophisticated coinage system, one of the first in Africa, fell into disuse as trade withered. The population was forced to migrate, abandoning the great stelae that had defined their identity. The true loss, however, was the knowledge held in the hands of the artisans. The specific techniques for quarrying such massive stones, for shaping them with such intricate detail, and for transporting and erecting them without modern machinery, died with the masters who had no one left to teach. A society that could move mountains of rock could not stop the slow erosion of its own foundation. What sustainable practices did they overlook in their pursuit of growth? Could simple crop rotation or managed forestry have saved their technological legacy? Their story is a powerful reminder that a civilization's greatest threat can be the silent, cumulative consequence of its own success. This gradual unraveling stands in stark contrast to the cataclysmic instant that would soon erase a different kind of genius from the map of South America. The Roman legions did more than just conquer a city. When Carthage fell in 146 BCE, the destruction was methodical and absolute. The victorious Romans, led by Scipio Aemilianus, were under orders not merely to defeat an enemy, but to erase it from history. They burned the great city for 17 days, tore down its walls, and in a final act of symbolic annihilation, sowed the surrounding fields with salt. This was not just a military victory, it was a cultural and technological purge. The libraries of Carthage, repositories of centuries of Punic knowledge, were systematically set ablaze. Among the ashes were works of immeasurable value, like the 28-volume agricultural treatise by the sage Mago. This was not a simple farming guide, it was an encyclopedic work on soil management, crop rotation, and arboriculture so revered that the Roman Senate itself later commissioned its translation into Latin, only for that Latin version to also be lost. The Carthaginians were masters of their environment, their agricultural techniques allowing them to thrive in North Africa's challenging climate. What specific methods for water conservation or soil enrichment turned to smoke that day? Their maritime knowledge was equally sophisticated. They possessed detailed periplus sailing guides that mapped not just coastlines, but also ocean currents, seasonal winds, and safe harbors across the Mediterranean and beyond, perhaps even down the Atlantic coast of Africa. Their famous circular harbor in Carthage was a marvel of military and civil engineering, a complex of dry docks and canals that showcased a mastery of hydraulics and urban planning. Why did Rome feel so threatened by this knowledge that its obliteration became a strategic objective? The answer lies in the nature of power. Carthage's prosperity was built on its agricultural surplus and its dominance of the seas, two pillars supported by advanced technology. By destroying the libraries and the land's fertility in one stroke, Rome was not just punishing a rival, it was dismantling the very system that could allow a new Carthage to rise. This was a conscious decision that technological superiority in a defeated foe was too dangerous to be preserved. The loss of Mego's manuals and the naval charts represents a chilling precedent, a deliberate severing of a branch of human ingenuity for purely political reasons. How many other libraries in how many other conquered cities suffered the same fate, leaving our understanding of the ancient world permanently lopsided? This act of intentional erasure forces us to confront a difficult reality, that the greatest threat to knowledge is not always a random act of nature, but a calculated decision made by human hands. A corroded lump of bronze and wood pulled from an ancient shipwreck holds a secret that rewrites history. The Antikythera Mechanism, as it is now known, was a device of staggering complexity, a precise astronomical calculator built with interlocking bronze gears. For centuries after its recovery, its true nature remained a mystery, a corroded puzzle box. It took modern imaging technology to reveal its intricate soul, a clockwork universe in a box. Researchers like Michael Wright have painstakingly reconstructed its design, revealing a machine that could predict the movements of planets, the phases of the moon, and even the timing of eclipses. This was not a simple calendar. It was a mechanical analog computer, a physical model of the heavens as the ancient Greeks understood them. The intellectual leap required to conceive of such a device is breathtaking. It means its creator possessed a deep understanding of astronomy, complex mathematics, and precision engineering, all converging in a single artifact. Yet this marvel stands in utter isolation. No other device like it has ever been found. Its very existence suggests it was not a one-off miracle, but perhaps a rare example of a known technology, a masterpiece that has outlasted all its contemporaries. The ship that carried it was a Roman vessel, likely transporting plunder from the Greek world. It sank in a storm, a common enough tragedy in the ancient Mediterranean. But think of what that storm truly erased. The mechanism itself is a ghost, but the greater loss was the living knowledge. The craftsmen who carved those precise gear teeth, the mathematicians who calculated the ratios, the philosophers who dictated its functions, they were all part of a fragile chain of expertise. The shipwreck did not just sink a box of gears, it severed that chain. How many other ships laden with sophisticated tools, philosophical texts, or master artisans were lost to the waves? Each one a potential library of innovation, a spark of advanced knowledge extinguished in the deep. The Antikythera Mechanism is a powerful symbol of this precarious diffusion. A single storm could erase a technology from the historical record for over 1,000 years, leaving us to wonder what other mechanical genius was simply swallowed by the sea. This vulnerability extends beyond the water, for entire languages themselves could be lost, taking with them the very keys to understanding a civilization's mind. Deep within the royal archives of Hattusa, cuneiform tablets recorded a secret that gave an empire its teeth. The Hittites did not just use iron, they mastered it at a time when the rest of the world was still cast in bronze. Around 1500 BCE, their smiths unlocked the process of smelting iron ore into a workable metal, a technology so revolutionary it was guarded as a state secret. This was not the brittle, impure iron of earlier attempts. Through techniques we can only guess at today, they learned to heat the metal in charcoal-rich fires, carburizing its surface to create a rudimentary form of steel, a material that could hold a sharper, stronger edge than any bronze weapon. This knowledge provided a staggering military and economic advantage. An army equipped with iron swords could shatter the bronze blades of its opponents, while iron-tipped plows could break through tougher soils, turning previously unworkable land into fertile fields. The Hittite king could control the distribution of this precious metal, rewarding loyal vassals with iron daggers while withholding the technology from rivals. Their empire was built in part on this metallurgical monopoly. Then their world came apart, invasions, internal strife, and the broader chaos of the Bronze Age collapse led to the swift and total abandonment of their capital. Hattusa was burned and left to the elements. The specialized guilds of smiths, the men who held the precise formulas for temperature and timing in their hands and not just on clay, were scattered to the winds. The tablets describing the processes survived in fragments, but the living, breathing expertise was gone. The consequence was a technological regression that lasted for centuries. Later cultures, from the Philistines to the early Greeks, had to painfully reinvent the entire complex art of iron production from scratch, passing through a long period of inferior, short-lived iron tools before rediscovering effective hardening methods. What if that chain of masters and apprentices had never been broken? How much further might agricultural technology or metalworking have advanced if the Hittite secrets had flowed directly into the Iron Age? Their story is a stark lesson in the fragility of a technological niche. A society can reach a towering peak of specialized knowledge, but if that knowledge is held by too few and is too dependent on a stable political structure, it can vanish in a single gust of political turmoil, leaving the future to stumble in the dark. Scattered across the arid plains of Peru, the Nazca lines are more than just mysterious drawings. They are the surface signature of a civilization that solved the riddle of the desert. Beneath those vast geoglyphs of spiders and hummingbirds lies a hidden network of engineering genius, a system of spiral stone holes leading down to underground aqueducts known as puquios. These were not simple wells. They were sophisticated hydraulic channels that tapped into deep underground aquifers, using gravity and carefully constructed ventilation shafts to guide life-giving water to the surface. The Nazca transformed one of the driest places on Earth into a habitable landscape, all without a written language to blueprint their plans. Their hydrological knowledge was a masterpiece of observation and oral tradition, passed meticulously from one generation to the next. This expertise allowed them to not just survive, but to flourish, creating the surplus of energy and resources needed to etch their colossal art into the desert floor. How did they achieve such precision, mapping the hidden veins of water with nothing but memory and shared experience? The answer remains one of history's great enigmas, a testament to a deep, intuitive connection with their environment. Yet, this brilliantly adapted system contained a fatal vulnerability. It was calibrated for a specific climate reality. When that reality shifted, the entire civilization faced a crisis it could not engineer its way out of. Evidence points to a series of intense climatic disruptions, likely powerful El Niño events, that brought either devastating floods that scoured their land or, more insidiously, prolonged mega-droughts that caused the underground water tables to drop beyond the reach of their puquios. The very infrastructure that had sustained them for centuries became a monument to a broken contract with the earth. As the water failed, social order fragmented. The communities that had cooperated to build and maintain the complex aqueducts scattered in a struggle for survival. In that dispersal, the chain of oral knowledge was shattered. The precise techniques for locating new water sources, for maintaining the aqueducts, and for managing the shared resource faded into cultural amnesia. The haunting truth is that some of these puquios still function today, a ghost of a technology that outlasted its creators. Modern engineers look at them with a sense of awe, recognizing an understanding of groundwater management that was not rediscovered for over 1,000 years. The Nazca did not vanish because they failed to adapt. They fell because the world they had so perfectly adapted to changed beyond recognition, erasing their most vital knowledge as completely as the desert wind erases a footprint. The Epic of Gilgamesh is more than just a story. Carved into clay tablets, its account of a world-destroying flood echoes a real and repeated trauma for humanity's first cities. In the fertile plains of Mesopotamia, the very rivers that gave life could also take it all away with terrifying speed. Archaeologists digging at the ancient city of found evidence not of a single event, but of multiple catastrophic deluges. A thick layer of silt deposited all at once separates the city's history into a before and after. This was not a gentle rising of water. It was a violent inundation around 2900 BCE, a wall of mud and water that would have smashed through mud brick walls and flooded the low-lying structures where scribes practiced their craft. Inside those buildings, the foundational knowledge of civilization was stored on fragile clay tablets, cuneiform scripts detailing precise base 60 mathematics, the system that gives us our 60-minute hour and 360-degree circle, would have dissolved back into mud. Early legal codes, the first attempts to formally organize human society, were washed from the record. Imagine the scribe who dedicated his life to recording celestial movements or legal judgments, only to see his life's work and the collective memory of his city liquefy before his eyes in a single, chaotic day. What nascent principles of justice or astronomy were lost in those waters, concepts that would have to be painfully rediscovered centuries later? The Mesopotamian floods present us with a profound duality. Water was the source of their agricultural wealth, the reason they could build permanent settlements and support the scholars who pushed the boundaries of knowledge. Yet that same water held the power to erase every trace of their progress, resetting the clock on human achievement. It is a stark reminder that the forces which sustain a civilization are often indistinguishable from those that can utterly destroy it. A civilization of sculptors carved portraits in stone on a scale that defies belief. The Olmec heads of ancient Mexico are not just artifacts, they are monuments of pure presence, each one weighing up to 24 tons and carved from a single block of solid basalt. The stone for these giants was quarried from the Tuxtla Mountains, a journey of over 100 kilometers through swamps and dense jungle. How did they move these multi-ton blocks without the wheel, without pack animals, without any of the technologies we assume are necessary for such a task? The answer lies in a lost system of logistics, a mastery of human power and simple physics. They likely used rollers made of logs, teams of hundreds hauling on ropes, and perhaps even barges for river transport, a coordinated effort that speaks of a highly organized society with a singular, powerful vision. The carving itself is another layer of mystery. The stone is incredibly hard, yet the features are rendered with a striking realism, from the determined set of the lips to the distinctive helmets each figure wears. They achieved this not with metal tools which they lacked, but with an advanced understanding of abrasives, using harder stones like jadate and quartz, along with sand and water. They could grind and polish the basalt over countless hours, a testament to patience and a technology of erosion harnessed for creation. This was not brute force, it was a refined artistic technology. Then, around 400 BCE, the Olmec heartland fell silent. Their great centers were abandoned, their sculpting workshops left dormant. The exact reasons are still debated, a combination of environmental shifts that disrupted agriculture and perhaps internal social unrest. With their dispersal, the specific knowledge system behind these colossal works evaporated. The later Maya, for all their own astronomical and architectural genius, never carved anything quite like them. The Aztecs, who would find these ancient heads and wonder at their origin, did not replicate the technique. The organizational blueprint was gone. The master sculptors and the engineers of transport had no apprentices to carry on their craft. This loss is a poignant reminder that some of the most sophisticated technologies are not just practical, they are aesthetic. The ability to coordinate a society to express its identity in 24-ton portraits is a form of knowledge as advanced as any metalworking. When that society unravels, that particular expression of human genius is erased forever, leaving only the silent, stoic faces to stare out from the jungle, guardians of a secret they can no longer tell. A weapon that seemed to defy the very nature of fire itself gave the Byzantine Empire an unassailable edge for centuries. Greek fire was not merely an incendiary device. It was a liquid terror that could not be extinguished by water, clinging to wooden ships and even burning as it floated on the waves. Projected through bronze tubes mounted on their warships, this fearsome substance created a wall of flame that saved Constantinople from multiple sieges, turning the sea into a funeral pyre for invading Arab fleets. The psychological effect was as potent as the chemical one. Enemy sailors, seeing an unstoppable fire that water only seemed to feed, must have felt they were facing a power granted by the gods themselves. The secret of its creation was so valuable it was considered a state secret of the highest order, known only to a handful of individuals, perhaps even a single family, and the emperor. The formula was a closely guarded mixture, thought to have included crude petroleum, quicklime which ignites on contact with water, and possibly other resins or chemicals that gave it its gelatinous, adhesive quality. This was not a technology lost to a volcanic eruption or a forgotten library. Its disappearance was a direct result of human design. When Constantinople finally fell to the Ottoman Turks in 1453, the last custodians of the formula perished or were lost in the chaos, taking the precise recipe and the intricate preparation methods with them. Generations of chemists and historians have since tried to reconstruct Greek fire, analyzing vague historical accounts and testing countless combinations, but the true, battlefield-effective formula remains one of history's great unsolved puzzles. Its loss stands in stark contrast to the accidental catastrophes we have explored. This was a technological black hole created by deliberate, absolute secrecy. The very strategy that made the weapon so potent for 700 years, its confinement to an impossibly small circle of trust, ultimately guaranteed its extinction. What could modern materials science learn from a substance that so perfectly manipulated combustion? The potential for non-water-based fire suppression or advanced propellants died with those last few chemists. This deliberate erasure forces a difficult question. Does a technology truly exist if its knowledge is held by so few that it can be erased by a single day's turmoil? High in the Andes, an empire governed 10 million people without a single sheet of paper or a line of script. Their administrative genius was woven into intricate arrays of knotted strings known as quipus. These were not mere decorative cords. Each quipu was a complex data storage device, a tactile library where the position of the knots, the colors of the cords, and the spin of the fibers encoded vast amounts of information. The empire's census data, its agricultural yields, its tribute records, and the movements of its armies were all meticulously recorded in this binary language of knots. At the heart of this system were the Quipu, the master keepers. These individuals were not just bureaucrats, they were living servers, trained from youth to read, create, and interpret these woven records, holding the empire's logistical map in their hands and memories. The Spanish conquest targeted this knowledge class with brutal efficiency, seeing the Quipu as priests of a rival power and their devices as idolatrous objects. The conquistadors systematically eliminated them and destroyed countless Quipus. The true collapse, however, was biological. Waves of European diseases like smallpox swept ahead of the armies, devastating the population and irrevocably breaking the chain of apprenticeship. A master keeper would die before he could pass on the nuanced meaning of a specific knot sequence to his student, and in that moment, entire chapters of history and administration turned to silence. Modern researchers now work like cryptographic detectives, using computers to analyze the patterns of surviving Quipus, searching for the logic in the loops and ties. They believe some of these devices may hold more than just numbers, perhaps recording laws, poetry, or the dynastic histories of the Inca kings. The loss is profoundly intimate. We can see the knots, but we have lost the grammar. What managerial insights into running a vast, mountainous state are permanently locked away? How did they calculate resource distribution across thousands of miles of rugged terrain using only string and memory? The Quipus erasure demonstrates a chilling truth that conquest is not complete until it has shattered the very tools a culture uses to remember itself, leaving future generations to stare at the beautiful, bewildering knots and wonder what stories they were meant to tell. The fragility of a civilization's memory often hinges on the most mundane of materials. In ancient Egypt, the lifeblood of knowledge was not just the ink, but the papyrus it was written upon. This seemingly humble reed, harvested from the banks of the Nile, was the paper of the ancient world, the medium upon which millennia of medical, mathematical, and astronomical wisdom was carefully recorded. Yet during the Third Intermediate Period, a time of political fragmentation, the stable systems that supported papyrus production began to falter. The Nile itself, the source of all life, experienced unpredictable fluctuations, disrupting the carefully managed cultivation of these reeds. As rival factions split the kingdom, the centralized authority that once organized and funded vast scribble workshops and library collections evaporated. Papyrus, once plentiful, became a scarce and expensive commodity. The consequences for technological knowledge were devastating. Advanced surgical procedures detailed in texts like the Ebers Papyrus, which described realistic methods for treating wounds and tumors, could no longer be widely copied or distributed. Imagine a skilled healer in a provincial town, his own papyrus scrolls decaying, unable to access the updated techniques or pass his own refined methods on to the next generation because the very material for writing had vanished. The knowledge wasn't burned or banned, it simply faded away as the scribe's primary tool disappeared. This was a quiet, resource-based disaster. The Ebers Papyrus itself, a surviving marvel, contains treatments for migraines and dental ailments that would not be fully rediscovered in Europe until the Renaissance, a gap of nearly 3,000 years. What other Egyptian innovations in chemistry, for lens grinding, or in mechanical engineering faded because the blueprints could not be reproduced? Their mastery of glassmaking, their early experiments with steam power described in temple inscriptions, all were vulnerable to this subtle erosion. The lesson is starkly modern. Our own digital age, for all its clouds and servers, is not so different. We rely on rare earth minerals, on stable power grids, and on complex global supply chains to maintain our own records. The Egyptian experience reminds us that a technology is only as resilient as the most fragile link in the chain that creates and sustains it. When that chain snaps, the silence that follows can last for centuries. Across the windswept plains of prehistoric Europe, another kind of intelligence was being carved into the landscape. The great stone rings like Stonehenge were not primitive monuments, but celestial calendars of breathtaking precision. The cultures that built them, such as the Bell Beaker people, possessed a sophisticated understanding of the sky, aligning massive trilithons to capture the exact rising and setting of the sun on the solstices. This was not guesswork. It was a geometry written in multi-ton blocks of bluestone and sarsen, hauled over distances of nearly 250 kilometers. The methods they used to achieve this feat have evaporated from history. We can speculate about wooden sledges gliding on greased timber tracks, about rollers and levers, and about the use of rivers and manpower to transport these giants. But the precise engineering knowledge, the organizational blueprint for mobilizing a workforce across generations for a single, unifying project, was not passed down. When these societies were transformed by new migrations and cultural shifts around 2000 BCE, the practical know-how died with them. The later Iron Age inhabitants of Britain, who lived among these stones, had no memory of the original purpose. They saw only mysterious, powerful relics from a forgotten age and wove myths around them. Think of the collective human effort, the thousands of hours of labor, the precise astronomical observations carried out over centuries, all culminating in a structure that could accurately mark the turning of the year. And then the ultimate irony, the very reason for its construction and the technique of its assembly were forgotten. What drove these people to invest so profoundly in a project whose utility would be lost to their own descendants? The silent stones offer no answer, only a testament to a specific form of genius, one that combined communal vision with a deep, empirical connection to the cosmos, erased by the slow but relentless tide of demographic change. The great Mongol conquests forged the largest contiguous land empire in history, but they also tore apart the very networks that had nurtured innovation for centuries. As their armies swept across Asia in the 13th century, the Silk Road, that ancient artery of ideas, was thrown into chaos. Caravans that once carried more than silk and spices now moved armies, and the safe passage essential for scholars and artisans to travel alongside merchants vanished. The flow of technological blueprints, the slow and precious diffusion of knowledge from one civilization to another, began to slow to a trickle. It was not merely a matter of conquest, but of a profound technological isolation setting in across entire continents. Chinese innovations like advanced woodblock printing and the magnetic compass, technologies that had been gradually migrating westward for generations, were suddenly stranded. The intricate recipes for gunpowder, once passed carefully from one alchemist to another along the trade routes, now had no clear path forward. This was not a single library burning, but a global network failing. The consequences became terrifyingly clear with the arrival of the Black Death in the 14th century. The pandemic did not just kill millions, it severed the remaining threads of connection, plunging Europe into a period of inward-looking survival. Regional knowledge pools, once refreshed by a constant stream of foreign ideas, began to stagnate. The Chinese compass, a device that would revolutionize European navigation and enable the age of exploration, took nearly a century longer to become widespread without the steady exchange the Silk Road provided. The same delay applied to the printing press. While Johannes Gutenberg is rightly credited with his revolutionary invention in the 15th century, the fundamental concepts of movable type had been developed in Korea and China centuries earlier. What if those ideas had flowed unimpeded? Could the European Renaissance have dawned 100 years sooner, spurred by an unbroken chain of technological synergy between East and West? The silence along the Silk Road meant that every civilization had to reinvent the wheel in isolation, losing precious time and collective momentum. This historical rupture forces a difficult question about our own globally connected world. Our digital networks are the modern Silk Road, and their disruption, whether by pandemic, political conflict, or other crisis, carries the same ancient risk. The Mongol invasions remind us that progress is not a solitary race, but a relay. When the handoff is fumbled, the entire human journey slows down. The line between ancient mythology and forgotten engineering blurs within the pages of Sanskrit texts. Here, in works like the Vaimanika Shastra, we find meticulous descriptions of Vimanas, aircraft said to navigate the skies using intricate machinery and mysterious energy sources. These are not vague allusions, but detailed accounts of aerial formations, pilot attire, and even hypothetical metals. The great debate, of course, is whether these were blueprints for physical machines or elaborate allegories for spiritual journeys. Yet, this debate might be missing the larger point. The true tragedy is not in proving their literal existence, but in the absolute loss of the practical knowledge they might represent. A 20th-century mystic named Subbaraya Shastri claimed to have channeled this text from a much older, deeper tradition, a tradition that was fractured and scattered by centuries of war and foreign invasion. In the chaotic aftermath of conflict, when libraries burn and scribes are displaced, what happens to the guilds of craftsmen, the artisans who could have interpreted these descriptions, who understood the properties of those mysterious alloys or the principles of propulsion being hinted at, were likely wiped out or their apprenticeships severed. The knowledge, whether literal or symbolic, was suppressed simply by the act of societal collapse. Imagine an alternate history where these ideas, however nascent, were preserved and allowed to circulate. The foundational concepts of aerodynamics, of energy conversion, even the very dream of flight, might have taken root in India centuries before the Wright brothers. The global timeline of aviation could have been utterly transformed. This possibility forces us to confront a difficult truth, that the suppression of knowledge is not always a deliberate act of burning books. Sometimes it is the quiet, accidental consequence of chaos, where the context for understanding a technology is the first thing to die, leaving behind only bewildering descriptions that sound like myth. The soaring arches of Roman aqueducts still stand across Europe, but their true purpose was lost for 1,000 years. These were not merely bridges for water, they were the cardiovascular system of an empire, a network of precisely calculated gradients and pressure management that delivered fresh water directly into bustling cities. Roman engineers mastered the subtle art of gravity-fed flow, constructing channels that descended at a perfect, gentle slope for miles, sometimes traveling underground or plunging through valleys on massive arcades. They built sophisticated sedimentation tanks to let impurities settle, and used inverted siphons to force water across deep ravines, technologies that required constant, meticulous upkeep by a dedicated class of engineers. When the Western Roman Empire fragmented, the institutional knowledge that supported this system shattered. The engineering guilds, the state-funded schools, the imperial budgets for maintenance, all dissolved into the chaos of the early Middle Ages. The aqueducts did not fail overnight. They decayed slowly, their channels silting up, their delicate stone and lead linings cracking from frost and neglect. A single blocked section or a collapsed arch could render an entire miles-long channel useless, and there was no longer a central authority with the expertise or will to fix it. The result was a catastrophic regression in public health. Without a reliable, clean water supply, cities shrank, and populations became dependent on contaminated local wells and rivers, leading to recurrent outbreaks of waterborne diseases that would have been unthinkable in the time of imperial Rome. Why could the brilliant minds of the medieval period not simply copy these magnificent ruins? The answer lies in the invisible knowledge embedded in the system. Anyone could see the arches, but they could not see the precise mathematical calculations for the gradient, the understanding of hydraulics needed to maintain water pressure over vast distances, or the organizational blueprint for managing a continent-spanning utility. The technology was not just in the stone, it was in the sustained, collective intellect required to keep it functioning. The aqueducts stand as a solemn memorial to a terrifying truth, that the most visible and solid of our creations are utterly dependent on the fragile, invisible institutions that maintain them. Deep beneath the sun-baked plains of Persia, a hidden river flowed in perfect silence. The Qanat was a marvel of patient engineering, a gently sloping tunnel carved through rock and soil to tap into a distant water table high in the foothills. Using only gravity, it guided this precious resource for dozens of miles, emerging finally into an open channel to feed orchards and fields in the heart of the desert. This was not a simple ditch. Its construction demanded a profound understanding of the land. Master surveyors, known as muqannis, used little more than sighting rods and an intuitive grasp of topography to plot the tunnel's course, ensuring the steady, shallow descent that kept the water moving. Ventilation shafts dug at regular intervals provided air for the diggers and prevented dangerous gases from accumulating in the depths. These systems transformed barren landscapes into blooming oases, supporting entire cities in places where life should have been impossible. Then came the hoofbeats of conquest, the armies of Alexander the Great, and centuries later the Mongol hordes swept across the region. Their strategy was total war, and they understood that to break a people, you must break their means of survival. They did not just burn cities above ground, they systematically destroyed what lay beneath, collapsing the vital ventilation shafts and blocking the mother wells that fed the Qanats. The muqannis, the specialized engineers who held the mental maps of these subterranean networks, were killed or scattered into slavery. The knowledge of how to locate a new water source, how to safely tunnel through unstable ground, or how to repair a collapsed section, evaporated with them. Overnight, communities that had thrived for generations found their lifeblood severed. The fields turned to dust, the gardens withered, and the silence that fell was the silence of abandonment. What thriving cultures in the heart of Asia never had the chance to emerge because this sustainable technology was erased from their world? The Qanat story forces a difficult realization. A society can possess the most brilliant and sustainable technology, but that technology is ultimately defenseless. It cannot survive the sword. Its continuity depends not on the genius of its design, but on the fragile, fleeting condition of peace. This vulnerability extends beyond the desert, for even the most resilient of ancient societies discovered that their greatest treasures could be lost not to war, but to the slow, creeping amnesia of time itself. The Moch people were masters of their coastal desert, turning barren valleys into lush fields with an intricate web of irrigation canals. Their grand adobe pyramids, the Huacas del Sol and de la Luna, rose like man-made mountains, centers of a society rich with artisans and engineers. They perfected the lost wax casting technique for their intricate goldwork, creating ceremonial cups and ornaments of stunning complexity. Their ceramic portrait vessels captured human expression with a realism that feels startlingly modern, each one a unique individual frozen in fired clay. This was a civilization at its artistic and technological peak. Then, the ocean itself seemed to turn against them. Around 600 CE, a mega El Niño event of unprecedented ferocity struck their world. The Pacific Ocean warmed, shifting weather patterns with devastating consequences. The first blow was a deluge. Torrential rains, which their desert landscape could not absorb, fell for months. Archaeological excavations reveal thick layers of silt and mud between the foundations of their buildings, evidence of catastrophic floods that scoured the land, collapsing their intricate irrigation networks and burying fields under debris. The very canals designed to bring life were destroyed by too much water, but the disaster had a second, crueler phase. After the floods receded, the climatic pendulum swung the other way, plunging the region into a prolonged and severe drought. The water sources they relied on dried up, and the desert they had tamed began to reclaim its dominion. Their agricultural system, a marvel of adaptation, had been calibrated for a specific climate reality, and when that reality shattered, their society fractured. How did such a resilient people succumb? Their technology had a breaking point, and the climate shift was simply too extreme, too prolonged. The true loss was not just in the abandoned pyramids, but in the silenced workshops. The master metalworkers who knew the precise alloy mixtures and the careful heating required for lost wax casting perished without passing on their craft. The ceramic artists who mixed their vibrant polychrome paints from rare minerals and captured a likeness in wet clay saw their unique styles and formulas vanish. The artistic peak they represented would not be reached again in the region for centuries. Their story is a haunting lesson in the limits of adaptation, a reminder that our own sophisticated systems are built for a world we assume will remain stable. The silent work of generations was recorded in the damp clay of Mesopotamia. In Babylon, scribes meticulously pressed cuneiform symbols into tablets, charting the steady march of planets and the sudden, awe-inspiring darkness of eclipses. Theirs was a science built on patient, accumulated observation, a celestial data set compiled over centuries. They tracked the cyclical dance of Venus with such precision that the Venus tablet of Amasajuka, created in the 17th century BCE, provided 20th century astronomers with a reliable record of the planet's behavior stretching back nearly 2,000 years. This was not mythology, it was hard data, a long-term study of the heavens that could have formed the bedrock for predictive models across the ancient world. But that foundation was shattered. The very libraries that housed these astronomical archives were primary targets for conquering armies. When the Assyrians sacked Babylon, and later when the Persians took control, countless tablets were pulverized into dust or scattered as plunder. The fragile continuity of observation was broken, the astronomical tradition fragmented, its master scribes killed or displaced, its most valuable records lost in the rubble of successive empires. Think of those anonymous watchers of the sky dedicating their lives to a single, patient task, only to have the collective work of their civilization dispersed by the chaos of war. What patterns did they detect that we are only now, with our satellites and computers, beginning to understand? The delay this caused was profound. Without access to the Babylonian data, other cultures were forced to start their own celestial charts from scratch, losing precious centuries in the development of a truly predictive science. This ancient loss underscores a vital modern principle. The preservation of data is just as critical as the invention of the technology that creates it. A brilliant insight is meaningless if its record cannot survive the passage of time and the turmoil of human conflict. Even a civilization that mastered water could be defeated by its absence. In the heart of Cambodia, the Khmer Empire built a metropolis of stone and liquid engineering, a city sustained by a hydraulic network of staggering ambition. Vast reservoirs called barrays, some stretching for miles, captured the monsoon rains, while a complex lattice of canals distributed this lifeblood to rice paddies and into the city of Angkor itself. This system allowed them to support a population of nearly 1 million people, making it one of the largest pre-industrial cities on Earth. LiDAR technology has peeled back the jungle canopy to reveal the true scale of their genius, showing a managed landscape of channels and embankments that turned seasonal deluges into a year-round resource. This was the pinnacle of hydraulic engineering for its time, a perfectly calibrated machine, but the machine had a fatal flaw. To create more agricultural land and to fuel the construction of their monumental temples, the Khmer engaged in widespread deforestation. They were cutting down the very anchor that held their system together. The tree roots that once stabilized the soil were gone, and when the monsoons came, they washed unprecedented amounts of silt into the canals and reservoirs. The system began to choke on its own land. Then, a climatic double blow struck. Evidence from tree rings points to a series of severe droughts in the 14th century, followed by intense monsoons. The droughts lowered the water levels, concentrating the silt, while the subsequent violent rains delivered catastrophic loads of new sediment, overwhelming and permanently clogging the intricate channels. The engineers who understood the delicate balance of this network, the masters of sluice gates and sedimentation, watched their life's work turn to mud. As the population abandoned the city, there were no new apprentices to train, no projects to maintain. The precise knowledge of how to manage such a vast, gravity-fed water system faded into the jungle silence. Their downfall was not a sudden invasion, but a slow, self-inflicted unraveling. They did not lack brilliance, they lacked sustainability. How do we manage our own vast, invisible networks today? The Khmer story is a direct warning that the greatest technological achievements are meaningless if they undermine the environmental foundations they are built upon. A working steam engine existed in the 1st century. In the workshops of Hero of Alexandria, a brilliant inventor demonstrated a remarkable device he called an eolipile. It was a sealed sphere mounted on a boiler with 2 nozzles bent like elbows. When the water boiled, jets of steam shot out, causing the sphere to spin rapidly on its axis. This was not a philosophical toy, it was a primitive steam turbine, a proof of concept for harnessing heat to create rotary motion. Hero documented it in his writings alongside automated temple doors and a coin-operated holy water dispenser, marvels of pneumatics and engineering that dazzled his contemporaries. Yet the eolipile never powered a mill, never pumped water from a mine, never turned a single wheel for industry. It remained a curiosity, a wonder for the temples, its world-changing potential utterly ignored. The reason lies not in a lack of genius, but in the economic bedrock of the society that produced it. The Roman Empire was an economy built on the backs of slaves. Human muscle was abundant and cheap, a readily available resource that made the complex development of steam power seem unnecessary, even frivolous. Why invest vast resources in perfecting a temperamental metal machine when the labor of thousands was already at your disposal? The social and economic incentives were simply not there. The path of least resistance was to use what they had in abundance, not to pioneer a new form of energy. Then the window of opportunity slammed shut. The political stability that allowed scholars like Hero to experiment fractured as the empire entered a long period of crises, invasions, and economic collapse. The Library at Alexandria, which might have preserved and disseminated these ideas for a later, more receptive age, suffered its own gradual destruction. The specific knowledge required to advance the technology, the understanding of pressure vessel strength, the metallurgy for better seals and pistons, faded away. The eolipile became a historical footnote, a ghost in the machine of antiquity. This single device represents a fork in the road of history that was never taken. If the cultural priorities had been different, if there had been a pressing need to save labor rather than acquire it, the systematic development of steam power could have begun in the 1st century. The Industrial Revolution, with all its profound transformations, might have occurred 1,700 years before James Watt watched his kettle. It forces us to ask a difficult question about our own society. What brilliant innovations do we dismiss today as mere novelties, not because they lack potential, but because they do not align with our own deeply entrenched economic priorities? The story of the Eolipile is a haunting lesson in how a civilization's greatest strengths can also be its most blinding limitations. A Viking longship crests a gray Atlantic wave, its sails straining against a wind that carries no scent of land. For days, the sun has been a memory hidden behind a seamless ceiling of cloud. Yet the ship's navigator knows his course. He pulls a translucent crystal from a leather pouch, a piece of Iceland spar known as a sunstone. Holding it to the sky, he rotates it slowly, watching for a telltale pattern of light within the stone's heart. This was not magic, but a forgotten physics. The crystal polarizes light, filtering the scattered rays that penetrate the cloud cover to reveal a faint, luminous band that aligns with the hidden sun. With that single bearing, he could set a course across thousands of miles of open ocean, reaching the shores of North America centuries before Columbus. This sophisticated skill, documented in Norse sagas as the use of the solarstein, was their secret. It allowed them to become the unmatched explorers of the North Atlantic during the medieval warm period, a time of milder climates that made northern seas more passable. But when that climatic window slammed shut, bringing colder temperatures and more ferocious storms, the great voyages dwindled. The specialized knowledge of the sunstone, passed from navigator to apprentice on the decks of those very ships, was no longer in constant demand. The crystal itself did not vanish, but the living, practiced skill of reading its subtle language slowly faded from memory, becoming legend. Modern experiments have proven the method works with stunning accuracy, yet for centuries it was dismissed as mere myth. The loss of the sunstone technique is a perfect example of a technology becoming a victim of its own success. It was so perfectly adapted to a specific time, a specific environment, and a specific purpose that when that purpose faded, the knowledge had no reason to persist. What other maritime secrets died with the Viking Age? Were there advanced techniques for reading ocean swells or star charts for northern latitudes that we can no longer decipher? Their story forces us to wonder which of our own most specialized technologies are silently waiting for a change in the weather to render them obsolete. A civilization of sculptors in West Africa turned earth and fire into a new age. The Nok culture of Nigeria, flourishing from around 500 BCE, left behind a legacy of hauntingly beautiful terracotta figures, their coiled hairstyles and piercing eyes capturing a distinct artistic vision. Yet their true revolution was forged in a different element. Their landscape is dotted with the remnants of tall, cylindrical furnaces and massive mounds of slag, the industrial waste of a society that mastered iron smelting centuries before it became common in many parts of the continent. This was not a simple process. They possessed a sophisticated understanding of how to reduce iron ore in a high-temperature furnace, using charcoal to strip away oxygen and leave behind workable metal. The knowledge required to build a furnace that could reach and sustain those critical temperatures, to manage the airflow, and to judge the exact moment the bloom of iron was ready, was a specialized craft passed down through generations of blacksmiths. The tools they produced, from agricultural implements to weapons, would have given them a profound advantage, transforming their society and likely influencing the spread of ironworking across West Africa. Then their vibrant culture faded into silence. the exquisite terracotta sculptures ceased to be made, their unique artistic style vanishing from the archaeological record. The furnaces grew cold. The leading theory points not to a conquering army, but to a slow environmental pressure. A shifting climate may have brought prolonged drought, stripping the land of the trees needed to make the vast quantities of charcoal for their smelting. Or perhaps changing rainfall patterns disrupted the agriculture that supported their population centers. The society that had tamed metal was ultimately vulnerable to the very earth it drew its resources from. Why did their distinct technological and artistic style not persist? The answer lies in the nature of their knowledge. It was held by a class of artisans and metalworkers, a living library of technique. When the social and environmental conditions that supported them collapsed, that chain of apprenticeship was severed. The later great ironworking centers of West Africa, like those of the kingdoms of Ghana and Mali, would develop their own magnificent traditions, but the specific Nok methods, the particular designs of their furnaces, and the stylistic flourishes of their sculptors were gone. This was a quiet technological regression, a loss that occurred without a single battle. It forces a sobering realization. A society can be on the cusp of a transformative technology, its artisans influencing an entire region, and still see its advances erased by the silent, cumulative strain of a changing world. Their silent stone faces gaze inland, a line of giants guarding a barren coastline. On Easter Island, the Rapa Nui people achieved a feat of engineering and social organization that seems almost impossible, carving nearly 1,000 moai statues, some weighing over 80 tons, and moving them miles across the island without wheels or draft animals. The methods they used were a form of technology as sophisticated as any machine, a deeply embedded knowledge of balance, leverage, and human coordination. Experimental archaeology suggests they may have used a rocking motion, walking the statues upright in a slow, controlled sway, or perhaps laid them on wooden sledges greased with sweet potato pulp, pulled by teams over log rails. But the true blueprint, the precise logistical choreography perfected over generations, is gone. The island's ecological collapse is written in the pollen records, a stark transition from a lush palm forest to a treeless grassland. The very wood needed to build the sledges and rollers for their grand ambitions was the first resource to vanish. With the trees gone, the statues could no longer be moved, and the great quarries were abandoned, leaving half-finished giants still tethered to the bedrock. This was more than a logistical failure, it was a spiritual and cultural severing. The societal cohesion required to mobilize a workforce for these monumental projects, the shared belief system that gave them meaning, shattered under the strain of resource depletion and the subsequent famines and conflicts. European contact delivered the final blow, introducing diseases that decimated the remaining population and shattering the last living links to the old knowledge. What profound understanding of statics and group dynamics died with the last master mover? The moai were not just stone, they were anchors of identity, repositories of ancestral wisdom whose full purpose we can only guess. Their story is a chilling lesson in overspecialization, where a society's most spectacular technological expression became entirely dependent on a single, finite resource. When that resource was gone, the knowledge itself became useless, a set of answers to questions that could no longer be asked. The brilliant blue of a Mesopotamian bead holds a secret recipe forgotten for centuries. In the workshops of ancient Mesopotamia around 1500 BCE, artisans were not just shaping glass, they were true chemists, carefully recording their formulas on cuneiform tablets. These were not vague instructions, they specified precise ratios of silica from river sand, soda ash as a flux, and minerals like cobalt or copper to produce vivid, stable colors. A single tablet might detail the exact process for creating a specific shade of lapis lazuli or a perfectly clear, colorless glass that mimicked crystal. This was advanced materials science, a technology born from patient experimentation. Yet this knowledge did not follow a steady, upward trajectory. Instead, it flickered, blazing brightly only to be nearly extinguished, then painfully rediscovered generations later. The cause was a cycle of political collapse and resource scarcity. When an empire like the Babylonians fell, the centralized workshops that employed the master glassmakers were disbanded. The artisans themselves, the living repositories of this chemical craft, were scattered by war or forced into other trades to survive. The fragile cuneiform tablets stored in palace archives were often destroyed or simply lay unread, their technical language becoming a dead letter to new rulers. A successor state, like the Assyrians, might later find these old formulas and try to replicate the brilliant glassware of their predecessors. But without the living context, the unwritten tricks of the trade, their attempts often failed. The glass would be cloudy, the colors dull or unstable. They had the words, but they had lost the music, the nuanced understanding of temperature control and impurity management that separated a masterwork from a flawed imitation. This stop-start progress had a profound, unseen cost for the broader path of science. Glass is the foundation of optics, lenses for magnification, prisms for bending light, beakers for chemical experiments, all depend on the ability to produce clear, consistent glass. Every time Mesopotamian glassmaking regressed, the possibility of developing a telescope or a microscope was pushed further into the future. How many curious minds were denied the simple tool of a magnifying lens because a craft technology was shattered by social disruption? The story of Mesopotamian glass is a quiet tragedy of interrupted potential. It demonstrates that the most vulnerable knowledge is often not held in great libraries, but in the skilled hands of artisans, whose craft can vanish as silently as a breath on a cool pane of glass. Deep within the Amazon basin, the earth itself holds the memory of a lost agricultural revolution. For centuries, explorers and scientists saw the rainforest soil as notoriously infertile, a thin layer of nutrients quickly exhausted by farming. But scattered across this vast landscape are mysterious patches of exceptionally rich, dark earth known as terra preta. This is not a natural phenomenon. It is a manufactured soil, a technological masterpiece created by sophisticated indigenous societies. These ancient agroecologists perfected a method of transforming poor tropical earth into a self-renewing, hyper-fertile black gold. They did this through a meticulous process of adding charcoal, known today as biochar, along with compost, manure, and broken pottery. The biochar acts like a microscopic coral reef, creating a vast, porous surface area within the soil that teems with beneficial microbes and fungi. This living matrix traps nutrients and moisture, preventing them from washing away in the heavy tropical rains, and creates a resilient foundation that remains fertile for hundreds, even thousands of years. Modern laboratories studying terra preta have found its carbon content and its ability to sustain crops far surpasses that of surrounding soils. It is a permanent, self-sustaining improvement to the land. The knowledge required to create this substance was not written down in manuals. It was a living science passed through generations, a deep understanding of the interplay between fire, organic matter, and the hidden life of the soil. These societies were not simply surviving in the Amazon, they were actively engineering it, cultivating an enriched landscape that could support large, complex populations. Then, the arrival of European explorers brought waves of diseases for which the native peoples had no immunity. Smallpox, influenza, and measles swept through the continents with a virulence that is difficult to comprehend. It is estimated that in some regions, over 90% of the population perished. This was not just a demographic catastrophe, it was an intellectual holocaust. The master farmers, the elders who held the precise recipes and techniques for creating terra preta, were wiped out. The living libraries of ecological knowledge were silenced in a single, brutal generation. The great garden cities of the Amazon collapsed back into the jungle, and the secret of the dark earth was largely forgotten, surviving only in scattered, isolated practices. The modern rediscovery of terra preta's properties feels like finding a message in a bottle from a more advanced civilization. Scientists now recognize that this ancient technology could hold a key to sustainable agriculture in the 21st century, a way to sequester carbon in the soil while boosting food production without chemical fertilizers. But its delayed adoption underscores a profound loss. For centuries, this revolutionary soil science lay dormant, its potential untapped because the civilization that perfected it was erased. How many other forms of ecological wisdom perished in that same colonial encounter? What knowledge of plant medicines, water management, or climate-resilient crops vanished when those cultures were shattered? The story of terra preta forces us to acknowledge that technological progress is not a single, linear path. It is a fragile ecosystem of ideas, and when a vast repository of indigenous knowledge is lost, the entire human species is impoverished. The wind that swept across the Persian highlands was a force of both creation and forgetting. For centuries, these same relentless gusts turned the sails of vertical windmills, ingenious structures of clay and wood that rose from the arid landscape like silent sentinels. By the 9th century, these were not primitive experiments but sophisticated machinery. Their vertical axles and cloth-covered sails expertly designed to grind grain and lift water from deep aquifers, harnessing a power that was both free and endless. This was an early triumph of renewable energy, a technology born from necessity in a land where flowing water was scarce but the wind was a constant companion. The knowledge to build them was a local masterpiece, passed from master millwright to apprentice, a deep understanding of aerodynamics and geology encoded in tradition rather than text. Yet the very isolation that fostered this brilliance also contained the seeds of its demise. When the Great Silk Road trade networks faltered due to shifting political alliances or the rise of new maritime routes, the economic lifeblood that sustained these regional centers dried up. The mills, once vital to local prosperity, became expensive to maintain. Then came the tremors of conflict, the marching armies that saw these structures not as wonders but as obstacles or sources of lumber. The delicate ecosystem of knowledge shattered, the master millwrights were displaced, their apprentices scattered, and the precise architectural ratios for catching the wind at the perfect angle, the secrets of the gear systems that translated horizontal force into vertical power, were gradually washed away by the sands of neglect. Why did this green technology not sweep across the world? It was a victim of its own perfect adaptation. The windmills were so perfectly suited to their specific geography and culture that they never developed the portability of an idea like the wheel. Without the constant cross-pollination of trade and stable empires to carry the blueprint forward, it remained a regional marvel, a ghost of a path not taken. How different might the Industrial Revolution have looked if its factories had been powered not by coal, but by the accumulated wind wisdom of Central Asia? The silent, crumbling towers stand as a monument to a profound truth, that an innovation, no matter how brilliant, cannot survive if the network required to sustain it falls apart. The echoes of these fallen civilizations reveal a hauntingly familiar rhythm. A society masters its environment, unlocks a technology that seems to promise permanence, and then a convergence of pressures causes that knowledge to blink out of existence. The pattern is never just one thing. It is the earthquake that shatters the palace while the drought starves the artisans and the invaders burn the library. The common thread is a cascade of failure where environmental shifts, resource depletion, and political fragmentation amplify one another, culminating in the ultimate loss, the specialized human capital that held the secrets in their hands. The master smith, the Quipu keeper, the surveyor of underground rivers. When these individuals are scattered or lost, the technology they embodied dies with them. So what can we learn from this chorus of silence? The first lesson is the non-negotiable need to diversify how we store knowledge. Relying on a single library, a single digital cloud, or a single guild of masters is an invitation to oblivion. The wisdom must be copied, translated, and embedded in multiple, redundant systems, from physical archives to decentralized digital networks, ensuring that no single point of failure can erase our collective memory. The second lesson is that sustainability is not a luxury, it is the bedrock of survival. Time and again, we see brilliant societies like the Khmer or the Rapa Nui pushing their local environment past its breaking point. Their technological achievements became the very instruments of their downfall, as deforestation led to silted canals or a lack of timber to move their moe. They were not ignorant, they were simply outpaced by the consequences of their own success. The third, and perhaps most vital, lesson is the insulating power of cultural exchange. Societies that were isolated, like the Nok or the Olmec, saw their unique technologies vanish completely when internal pressures mounted. In contrast, ideas that traveled along the Silk Road, even when delayed, had a chance to take root elsewhere. Open networks of trade and communication act as a global backup system for human ingenuity. Now hold these ancient patterns against the glare of our own world. Are we repeating these mistakes? Our most critical knowledge is now stored in ephemeral digital formats, vulnerable to solar flares, cyber attacks, or simple societal disruption. We face a climate crisis driven by the overexploitation of fossil resources, a modern parallel to the deforestation of Easter Island. And in some sectors, we see a retreat from global cooperation, a dangerous step towards the kind of isolation that made past civilizations so fragile. This analysis is not merely an academic exercise, it is a diagnostic tool, a way to read the vital signs of our own technological era and recognize the warning flashes we have seen before. Understanding why these ancient lights went out is the first, essential step to keeping our own from suffering the same fate. From the ashes of Thura to the silenced Quipu keepers, our journey reveals a sobering truth. Progress is not a guaranteed ascent. It is a fragile flame passed from one generation to the next, and it can be extinguished by a single disaster, a prolonged drought, or a moment of human conflict. These lost chapters of human ingenuity are not merely historical footnotes. They are urgent messages from the past, reminding us that every piece of knowledge we possess today exists on a delicate continuum of preservation and learning. The advanced hydraulics of the Minoans, the celestial computers of the Greeks, the sustainable soils of the Amazon, each one represents a branch of our family tree that was pruned away, forcing humanity to regrow what was lost. Their silence speaks directly to our modern world. We must become the guardians our ancestors lacked. This means building decentralized and redundant systems for our data, ensuring that no single library fire or server failure can erase our collective memory. It demands a commitment to environmental stewardship, recognizing that our most brilliant innovations are meaningless if they undermine the planetary systems that support all life. The philosopher George Santayana's warning echoes across the millennia that those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it. We honor the forgotten pioneers of technology not just by studying their ruins, but by actively constructing a more resilient and interconnected future, one that learns from their vulnerabilities. If this exploration of history's greatest mysteries has resonated with you, we would love to hear which lost civilization speaks most powerfully to you in the comments below.